Okay, welcome everyone. We're going to make a start. That's a bit too loud. My name is Nathan Hughes. I'm one of the co-directors now of Circle. It's my pleasure to welcome you all here to what we called the relaunch, that might become an annual lecture that we're not quite committed to yet, but some kind of event to really kick-start Circle again. So I'm just going to start with the basics about how the session is going to run. The eagle-eyed among you will notice we're already a few minutes behind, and I'll try not to eat into too much of the rest of the more interesting time. So in a moment, I'm just going to give you a quick intro to Circle, how we've got to where we are today, and what our kind of ambitions are for the coming period. And then I'll hand you over to the kind of headline acts of today, and Liam will spend a bit more time introducing Simon and Ruth to you. We've then got about half an hour for your kind of questions, comments, insights, and then refreshments out there, just where we came through. And suffice to say, we got the bid in for this. We spent the money for this before any financial squeeze, so there will be wine. there will be wine for you to enjoy. Okay, so I did just want to give you before that just a very brief introduction to Circle, which I've also called why we launch an 18-year-old research centre that is more successful than ever. So you'll get a sense as I talk through that Circle is not something which is in disrepair, that needs rebuilding and relaunch. Is really we're moving forward from a very strong position here, and I'll share with you how we've got to this position that we're kind of currently in. So the story is the story of Sue Yendall, Professor Sue Yendall. The lighting doesn't do justice to the image there of Sue looking only slightly younger than she looks now, when she launched the centre back in 2006, when at that time she was professor at the University of Leeds. For those who know the acronym but never knew what it stood for, Circle is the Centre for International Research on Care, Labour and Equalities. And when Sue launched the centre back in Leeds, it really worked across those topics of care, labour and equalities. So care has always been a real central focus, but also lots of work around gender and inequalities and entering the labour force. But as time's gone on, clearly it's the agenda around care that both Sue and therefore Circle have become increasingly known for. So productive kind of early years, and we think, just talking with Jill, we think it was about 2014 when Jill Valentine, I'm not sure if the technical term is poached or headhunted or appointed Sue to not only come up, Sue Yendall to come to the University of Sheffield, but to bring Circle and some of her staff with her. So from around 2014, Circle's had its house here at the University of Sheffield. And since then, really, it's gone from strength to strength. So from 2016, 2017, the ESRC large grant, Sustainable Care, which was exploring the future of adult social care in this country. And then from there, give birth to two very impressive research projects that now sit within Circle. So the first is the Centre for Care, an ESRC centre, so flagship investment from the ESRC of some sort of 12 million, spread across 5 universities and 4 kind of non-academic partners, but housed here at the University of Sheffield, where Kelly is our centre manager. And then alongside that, the project officially called Impact Capital Letters, you can't say it without saying Impact Capital Letters, which is called Improving Adult Care Together, a UK evidence implementation centre that works in a myriad of really innovative ways across the country to embed research evidence on adult social care into bespoke, so evidence-based responses in situ to adult social care issues. And through these two projects, both of which Sue was sort of central to, we've now got within Circle an array, a really impressive array of outstanding staff. Right, some of you can recognise your faces. Some of you are saying, "Is that really what?" So this is our staff group in Circle now. So some employed through Impact, some employed through the Centre for Care, some on other projects. But a really exciting array of researchers, of kind of policy experts, practice experts, that provides us with a fantastic opportunity from these projects to really build out our research in the area of care. But also what Liam and I have quickly kind of realised is that that's just a slither of the outstanding research around care and caring and social care that's going on at the University of Sheffield. Now, back in 2023, a group of us put together an application to the NIHR to join what's called their School of Social Care Research. 18 months later, we're still not allowed to announce whether that bid was successful or not, but the exercise really helps us to see exactly what's going on across the University of Sheffield, and we found out that there were around about 110 kind of live care, social care and caring related projects across our university that amounted to well over 25 million of income. That research was really spread right across our institution in all of our faculties, from engineering to arts through to the social sciences. And an array of funders, as my very amateur word cloud kind of starts to show. I guess more interestingly, a vast array of partners as well, that we were networked in with the great and the good providers of care and social care, not just regionally but nationally as well. So again, a really kind of fantastic opportunity for us to really build a comprehensive sense of kind of care-related research here at Sheffield. And I'm not going to go through these, but as you would imagine, the full array of different topics that we might be interested in. So this is the mission then that Kenny, Liam and I, and these are just some examples, sorry, of some of the talks that we heard at our Circle Showcase event last year that illustrate some of that kind of spectrum of different projects that are ongoing at Sheffield, and actually drew from some quite unexpected parts of our university, including a research group in neuroscience looking at practice in care homes. So this is the mission then that the three of us have for the coming years. The building from this fantastic base of adult social care research that the Centre for Care and Impact gives us, to really broaden the scope of Circle, to think about how we enable a theoretical, methodological and policy focus on care provision in all of its forms right across the life course. How can we in doing so, better showcase and reflect that wide array of different research that's going on here at the University of Sheffield, and really showcase how certainly nationally, definitely world leading we are in this research area. And to use the mechanisms and resources that Circle provides to support and stimulate new research, to think about how we build those collaborations across the university, think about how we support, as I said before, our early career researchers who are looking to build their careers in care research, and how we can use the vehicle of Circle and the resources that we have to enable them to do effective research, to invest in that kind of meaningful engagement of people with lived experience that we all know is central to developing effective research projects in this area, to build the sorts of relationships with our policy and practice partners, particularly in the region but elsewhere, that are long-term, that are well sustainable, that are based on really understanding and appreciating the time that they give us, and the infrastructure that our professional services team provides us that will ensure that our projects can have that reach and that impact. So for those that are at university who might want to be thinking about getting involved, now's a good time to do so. We have some emerging themes, if you like, a couple that are pretty well worked out now, a theme around kind of children and families, social care, and one around kind of theorising care, like thinking about the concepts that sit behind our work. And then others that are in progress, including around, I don't know if Diane's here, around kind of organisations, labour and employment, and another around digital care that will build on the work going on in the centre. But there's room for more, and we have the resources to support the development of this work. So if there are others in the room who are thinking, I'm not yet represented, please do get in touch with me and Liam. And I'll end with this slide. It's obligatory now, I think, to have a QR code somewhere in your presentation. So this is mine. This QR code will take you to a Google form that allows you just to get in contact with us. So either leave your email address if you want us to add you to our mailing list, or if you're a researcher and you want to somehow get involved and let us know about your interests. If you're from a local agency and you've got a research need that you want to engage with us around, or if you have lived experience and you want to get involved in the groups that are sort of shaping our approaches both in the centre and the Centre for Care, please do fill in that form and get in touch. So I probably went over time. I'm going to hand over to Liam now, who's going to kick off our main session.
Thank you, Nathan. All very clear. And also to point out, there's been some updates to the website and updates to the colours as well. Nice orange. And banners as well. So firstly, thank you all for coming. We're really quite lucky, I think, to have two speakers today, the first of which is Dr. Simon Duffy, who's the director of Citizen Network and has worked to advance social justice for 3 decades. And then we're also going to have Ruth Hamlin, who's co-founder of Careful, which was set up as a space to expand ideas about the role of care in the new economy. And I think what's worth saying is we're going to be recording the talks as well, and we'll be sending those round, and we'll also send links about those organisations so you can find out a little bit more. So we've got our two speakers. I'm going to say a little bit more about you, Simon. Simon's had a very extensive career, and when I looked through the information in terms of his biography, it was quite incredible to see all of the interesting things that Simon has done. So I am only going to be picking a few out here. So his work's both practical and theoretical. He's created social innovations, organisations and network, and developed a number of ideas and theories, particularly centred around ideas of citizenship, but he's also pioneered work around the use of personal budget. And in 1996, he founded Inclusion Glasgow to provide radically individualised support to people with complex disabilities. He's led thinking on self-directed support and personal budget, founding In Control in 2003. In 2009, Simon established a Centre for Welfare Reform as an independent think tank in Sheffield. He's co-founded the UBI Lab network, which has become one of the most successful organising campaign groups in the UK on basic income. And they've expanded worldwide now with, I think, about 40 different UBI labs. A lot of his more recent work is linked to Neighbourhood Care, and Simon will be talking about Neighbourhood Care quite a bit in his talk today, which I'm sure you'll find very interesting. He's published widely in relation to care, citizenship, and various other areas, and also won numerous awards, including the RSA's Prince Albert Medal, and also the the Social Policy Association Award for Outstanding Contribution to Social Policy. I think I was there when you got that, actually. So lots going on. I will stop there and welcome Simon to the floor. Thank you, Simon.
Oh, good. All right. Can you hear me all right at the back? Yes. So this is my talk. It's what's next for social care. And it's a kind of sprint through the past, the present and the future of social care. And my plan is, if I'm good, the beginning will be quite fast, and then I'll slow down as we get to the more interesting, complex things. If I do a really bad job, I'll spend far too long at the beginning and then race through the stuff that actually is much more important and interesting. At a good academic event, any paper, you have to declare your prejudices and the reasons why people should worry, rather. But yeah, I'm an odd fish in a sense, because I'm not a proper professional. I've done, I think, what I'm not sure everybody would agree it was professional work, but people paid me to do it, so in that sense it was professional, and it was quite effective. But I've also theorised, and I've also published in an academic world. Actually, when I got that award, Liam, I rang my mum very proudly to tell her. She said, because it was outstanding contribution to social policy by a non-academic, and my mum put, you are an academic, you've got a PhD. I said, well, that's academics don't think that's enough. You have to be employed. So
I'll have a word with them.
Yeah. But yeah, so a lot of my work, I suppose, has been very focused on people with learning disabilities or learning difficulties, and that, for me, that's been a gift. But I recognise that's probably lends a certain colour to the way I look at things and look at problems that you won't get if you're coming from a different point of view. And I also, and again, I can't defend all of my reasoning in this talk, but I really see the institutions not as just a kind of not very nice thing that happened sometime in the past, but as really part of a kind of force for evil that really grew up in the 18th and 19th century and we've not dealt with at all. So I don't think of institutionalisation as a bad thing somewhere in the past, but as a kind of very active force in our life today. And again, there's more to be said about that. But the most important caveat, and especially as there's some friends and colleagues or semi-colleagues in the room, is that some of the things I'm going to say are worded very strongly as criticisms. They're not criticisms of people. You know, if I'm talking about commissioning or personalisation negatively, I don't mean the people. Like my one big experience of working in these systems, excluding working with the Department of Health, but put that in brackets, but everybody else is almost always a good person working in a crazy system. And so anything I say is not personal. It's about the systems that we've created that we often really struggle to change. I also want to just dedicate this talk to my friend Claire Hyde. Yesterday we had a funeral for Claire. Claire was had a massive impact on my life. She's an amazing champion of women's rights and of care as a concept, and sadly died very recently. Anybody who doesn't know of Claire Hyde's work, there's a lot of information on the Citizen Network website. Amazing, amazing woman. And I will touch on some of that in the talk. But yeah, this is following the rule that tell people what you're going to say and then say it. So this is what I'm going to say. I'm going to say that social care hasn't escaped the institution. I'm going to say that the era of commissioning, which I'm old enough to remember the exact beginning of, has failed. I'm going to say that personalisation has not lived up to what it promised. And that's very painful for me. And maybe because it's such a big part of my life, you could say I'm being too hard, but I'm going to try and explain why I think I'm not being too hard. I'm going to say that really the future, the next horizon for social care, is to commit to neighbourhoods. And I'm going to express some scepticism about the role of central government in making the next layer of reforms, but the possibility that actually there are ways forward, regardless. This is just up the road from where me and Nicola live. This is was the Ecclesall BLO Union Workhouse in Nether Edge. It's about 200 yards away from where I live. I make these points about it being 10 years after the new Poor Law, 12 years after the Great Reform Act. I'm just making this point because I don't know if people know the history of all of this stuff, but the Great Reform Act was the point in which the middle classes were allowed to vote. And it's almost like the first thing they do is start persecuting ordinary people. Like this sits on a hill which is now full of housing, but at the time looked over a valley where ordinary people were doing the hard work of the early industrialisation in Sheffield. That's what poor houses and workhouses were there to do. They socially intimidate the poor who'd been forced off the security that the land was provided into towns to do industrial work. That's the long context for this work. This is a graph that I didn't find it online. I had to go to the King's Fund Library to find the Caring for People white paper, which I think was published in 1989. This was, I think, probably the most consequential bit of public policy in social care, certainly of my lifetime. And it's interesting that you expect to find everything online, but you can't find this online. This simple graph shows that in the early 1980s, the Thatcher government actually there was the biggest increase on social care spending in real terms over the 1980s, and it was all done on the back of something called board and lodging, which was an entitlement to residential care, not an entitlement to people, but to an entitlement that was to the residential care industry, to which it gave a very significant boost. Residential care's only significant growth point was at this point. As soon as this money was then transferred to local government, the growth in residential care kind of stopped. It wobbles around a bit. It even went down in the early days of personalisation, and it's going up a little bit now. But it basically wobbles around the same level. Private sector funding doesn't really drive it up very much. Public sector funding did. This is Jack's here, isn't he? And I didn't... Where's Jack gone? Jack, I've still got this paper to give you back. And I've protected it. But this is a fascinating paper from 1951 produced by the Socialist Medical Association, but Jack and I are both also members of the Socialist Health Association, which is what it became. If you read it, basically, crudely speaking, I'd say nothing's changed and some things have got a lot worse. The issues haven't changed. The doctors then could identify the need for more community support. They also identify the need for better income security for older people. Those are the two of the big themes. Actually, the level, if you measure it in terms of residential care, we're more institutionalised now than they were in 1951, which I think is kind of like a bit... Now, it's kind of hard to read. I shared all these extra bits we shared with some Spanish colleagues who've been doing quite a lot of work with colleagues in Spain around deinstitutionalisation, and they were trying to understand what had happened in England. But just to simplify, that grey slot there is the peak of institutionalisation for people with learning disabilities, okay? And that has now disappeared, so if you were doing it now, that's gone. This green one is people with learning disabilities living with their families. And the key point of this slide, without going into every detail, is if you actually add up where people live now, there are more people living in care homes, group homes, other forms of, not as badly institutional provision, but still institutional provision without proper housing rights, without proper personalised support. There are more people in that situation than there were at the peak of the institutions. So we've certainly changed something, but it's hard to say that we've actually really empowered people and enabled people to be citizens. So, yeah, I think the institution is alive and kicking. Yeah, we respond to social problems in the same way as at the peak of the institution. If somebody has a crisis, we let them have a crisis, and then we respond with institutional support. Those services that people receive, with some honourable exceptions, Mary, but largely take control over people's lives, largely determine how people live. Services are still primarily targeted at the poor. You have to kind of be poor to get these services because of means testing, for adults at least, and charges and other measures make you poorer than you otherwise would be. Again, so the poor law is still in place. And yeah, the service model primarily takes people out of their community. So over 50% of adult social care spending is on residential care, which moves people from their neighbourhood to somewhere else. Very rarely are people going to get support in their own community. Now, there is domiciliary care, often very inadequate, and there are good arrangements for direct payments for some people. But, if you're really looking at what's happening to the money, most of it is still basically committed to quite institutional responses that are not really building the kind of communities we want. In 1990, I started my kind of proper career in London at this organisation called Southern Consortium. And what Southern Consortium was doing was supporting people who'd left the first institution to close, which was Dartford Park Hospital in Kent, closed in 1988. And they're supporting people in London to live good lives. The model was often talked about as ordinary life model, or there was these theories, social role valorisation, normalisation. It was about equipping people to have ordinary homes on ordinary streets and be part of the community. It was certainly a huge improvement on institutional provision. And at that point, when I arrived in 1990, there was all sorts of interesting things going on, all sorts of innovative work going on, and for a few years I worked there trying to introduce other ideas like individualised funding and brokerage and supported employment and other things to try and lift people's status as citizens in the community. Particularly important actually was supported living, which at the time, not now it kind of means group living, but at the time meant giving people real homes with real housing rights. When all of these government reforms kicked in 1990, 1992 particularly was the very important moment where lots of the funding got transferred from NHS to local government, the organisation went through a kind of little crisis, which was a big part of my life, trying to resolve the fact that the two health authorities in Southwark disagreed with each other about what Southwark Consortium should do. And in the end what we did was create quite an interesting, you can't really gather it from this picture, but quite an interesting idea, which was like make this a kind of place where local government, health, community sector could come together, pool funding, and develop individualised and personalised community solutions. This was in the very early 90s, okay? Now, after I left, about 1996, I think, I got a phone call from my friends who was running the organisation saying, yeah, that's all been stopped now, Simon. The local authority said, no, we're in control, we're the commissioner, we're not going to have that arrangement, we'll take back all of the funding from the NHS, we'll be in control of that funding. We don't need you to be the dominant provider. So what happened is all the small organisations then said, the local authority is going to try and boss us around. So they all went into sort of consortium, kind of absorbed in, and then the organisation had to change its name because it was now treated as it can't be for Southwark because it had to now play in the marketplace. Yes, it could only be one alternative. So it became Choice Support, which is now, I think, about the third biggest support provider for people with learning disabilities in the country. And a good organisation, I've remained in touch with it all through my working career. But that's kind of a good example of what commissioning did, really. Basically, organisations could no longer have roots in community. Their job was to dance to the new tune of commissioning and purchasing and increasingly regulation. But I remember at the time when all of these came, you'd always get these kind of commissioning slides that would always have this kind of logic to them. You know, we're going to assess needs in the community, we're going to plan, we're going to tender, we're going to procure, we're going to monitor. And so it sounds very virtuous, it sounds very logical, doesn't it? And very rational. But in this book that I wrote in 1996, I argued this is like completely missing the point. You don't understand what people's needs are. Only people understand what their needs are in relationship to community. You don't understand what triggers positive change. Values and relationships create change, not tendering documents. And so on and so forth, really. You've got this kind of rational theory of change which is based on nothing. Remember, all of these policies came in without any evidence at all. And it was very hard to get personalisation past that barrier, but giving more power to organisations and structures and taking power away from communities turned out to be very easy. No evidence needed for that at all. So yeah, this may seem very harsh, but I think it's fair, and maybe this is an unreasonably unscientific test, but I'm now the same age as many other people running these systems, okay, and some of them friends or colleagues, and we meet and we look each other in the eyes and we say, yeah, that didn't work, did it? Like, we know it didn't work. We remember the lies we were told to sell these ideas when we were much younger, and we know it didn't work. Commissioning as a process, procurement and all of those processes simply didn't work. So back at that point in my life, the early 90s, this is a model I published in 96, I started to try and think, what would be different? How could we still need some of the elements, still need good support, and we still need taxation, and we still need good government. So how could we rethink those relationships to move away from this kind of professional gift model, which patronises and controls disabled people, and move to something that situates people as citizens in their own community? And this kind of citizenship model is what I developed. And Liam mentioned the thing that I am, aside from my family, I must say, most proud of, which was the work that me, with great help from friends like Francis Brown and John Dalrymple, this is not work I did alone, but creating Inclusion Glasgow to help people leave institutions with utterly personalised support into their own homes, with proper housing rights, with power and control over their own budgets, to live good, meaningful lives in their community. That's the thing that, you know, when God takes me back, that's the thing I'll be saying, right, I did all right, didn't I? That worked, because it did work. And I like this slide particularly. It might seem a bit of an odd slide. I always makes me smile because I had nothing to do with this bit of research, which was about the work of Inclusion Glasgow. But I thought they asked a really cool question, because they asked people with learning disabilities or their advocates who had made the difference, right? So they won't say they'd done things about how people's lives had improved, but they asked people what really made the difference. And you can see, like, Inclusion Glasgow made 32% of the difference. I'm not claiming any great scientific merit to these percentages, right? But I'm really chuffed about that because it might seem a small thing, but the thing is about the design of Inclusion Glasgow is it enabled all those other things to happen. And that's what's unusual. That's what makes this stuff work, is that people actually can use their own agency, the agency of their family, the agency of their community. That's what community brings to this, is all this extra energy and possibility. This is also the time which we published this book this year, Everyday Citizenship, but the original book, Keys to Citizenship, was first published in 2003. So as well as trying to think about how to do stuff, part of my life has been thinking about why are we doing it? What's the purpose of it? And so I still think this is a kind of better way of thinking about the purpose of public services, actually on a quite a broad scale, not just social care, than kind of utilitarian measures of welfare, for instance, which actually, as a philosopher, utilitarianism is rarely valued by philosophers, but seems to be largely valued by social scientists. It's a very dubious moral theory, I would suggest. And then the other thing, and certainly in Control we developed a 7-step model, but in my work these days I tend to use this slightly simple model of kind of helping people think about self-directed support as giving people clear entitlements, the capacity to plan together with that knowledge, the ability to design support in community, and with a real focus on outcomes. And I include this slide, I think, because, I mean, if I was doing a talk about personalisation and self-directed support, I'd probably spend more time expanding on stories and giving examples. But in a way, I think this is quite a useful slide, even though it's a bit abstract, for understanding something that often gets missed. And actually, at the time of, Catherine will remember this, but at the time these ideas became very politically popular, they also got corrupted very quickly into a kind of new form of consumerism. They became about shopping for services. And this was kind of very painful, I must say, because all these ideas were built around people being citizens. And the thing that was critical, and it was my friends Pippa Murray and John O'Brien who helped me kind of conceptualise it in this way, but if you think about what we're doing economically in social care, in that kind of professional gift model, what we're doing is kind of spending people's money for them and hoping they get value from it. And what self-directed support at its best does is it moves resources into people's lives in such a way that they can integrate that financial resource, which isn't the most important thing in people's lives, but can play a really helpful role. It integrates it with people's ability to enter into community, build on relationships they have, build on the gifts they have, even remobilise different resources that they have. So this is, like, for me, kind of helpful conceptualisation. But too much success is bad for your career. Getting medals is bad for your career, actually, it turns out. Yeah? So when you find your ideas adopted by government, and just any warning for anybody in the room, that's when your career's over. Yeah, because you're too much trouble. And if you start criticising the implementation of these ideas, then you're in really big trouble because you're kind of somehow personifying them. So my career kind of changed radically after this point. And, you know, I am very critical of how these ideas were implemented, I'm afraid. And I wish I wasn't, because actually I put almost 20 years of my life into making some of these things happen, and when I look at it now, I think, well, what did we really achieve? Some point must have been lobbying by the residential care industry. They just opted themselves out of this system. Again, this is not in the legislation, but now in local government, residential care is just treated as a separate thing. And that's where over half the money is spent. So that's gone. Almost everywhere in the country, but Sheffield's making a good stab at maybe getting this right, but everywhere I went, and I did do some research on this in about 2015, for the only bit of work I ever got from the Department of Health, was to look at how individual services funds were being implemented. This, if you're not familiar with this is basically how to have a personal budget without having to have all the responsibility of taking that money and employing staff. It's saying, actually, like Inclusion Glasgow did, The money is hosted somewhere, and then the job of the organisation is to figure out with you how to organise that. Which for most people, I would say for 80% of people using social care, is the only way forward, because it's only a small, not small, but a minority of people who can really take on. At the end of life, you don't want to become an employer or manage a direct payment, I don't think. Many people with learning disabilities, severe mental health problems, don't want that extra responsibility, but they still want personalised support that makes sense to them. So if local authorities, which typically they don't create those mechanisms, then this system is kind of dead, really. There's no upfront budget, so people don't know what they're entitled to anymore, so they're basically told really through their care plan what they're entitled to, which is kind of kills the whole point of the creativity I mentioned. Flexibility has been eaten away, and people are often in direct payment systems that are far too burdensome. It doesn't mean direct payments aren't a good thing. Direct payments are a good thing, and many people could get great value from them. But that isn't the be-all and end-all of personalisation. If it is, it's just, it doesn't support enough people to have that kind of flexibility. There are also criticisms that personalisation received from people like Catherine, which are true, are fair criticisms, which is to do with the inherent limits of. So even if we implemented self-directed support in the right way, I hate the word personalisation, but it has become this personalised number plate kind of idea. The idea was called self-directed support. Now, the reality is, Ruth will touch on this, most care is provided by family, friends sometimes, neighbours sometimes, but family is the centre of it. And personalisation didn't really recognise that. It was really about changing the way services worked, and often hesitated to really open the door to questions of genuine entitlement. And there is not enough attention to the injustice faced by women, by workers, by the role of contribution, the local economy, the primary role of the focus for services, not relationships, and fundamentally not enough attention to community itself. And that's what I'm going to talk about. After my career went kaput, actually Claire Hyde, who I mentioned earlier, helped me by saying, come and help me write a book about Women's Centre, which is this organisation in Halifax, which Claire had helped develop. And where I started to learn much more about both the negative experiences of so many women in the care system, but also the brilliant things women were doing through a combination of peer support and excellent support to transform people's lives. Over the last 15 years, and I went to Claire's funeral with my friend Kelly Hicks, who founded People First Group Doncaster, just an amazing peer support group, 3,500 people in Doncaster helping each other. And this is a report that we did where we demonstrated that that organisation, just through peer support, was generating £3.5 million worth of value. And increasingly in my work on citizenship, I've tried to shift the conversation away from just focusing on rights and to start talking about what are the responsibilities of citizenship. That's partly because my friends who are self-advocates with learning disabilities, they're making that shift in conversation, aren't they, Catherine? I mean, that people want to be citizens, people want to contribute, and they want to be seen to be contributing. But the other part of this is actually we need to wake up to the fact that if we're going to save the world, we're going to save each other, we're going to save the planet that we live on, we're all going to have to start behaving much more like citizens. Our attempt to solve social problems just by praying that they will somehow do the right thing isn't going very well, is it? The people are probably very familiar with this idea of upstream solutions to downstream problems, you know. So this is my way of theorising about this. So, you know, and all these things here are good, and we need good services. This is I've created them. My friends run them. Good services are important. We need to, though, focus on people's rights as citizens, and we need to focus on family. And I think Ruth will talk a little bit about some of the wider socioeconomic factors that we need to think about. But increasingly, my work is focused on what is this thing that's community that we've lost sight of. Children England, I don't know if people are familiar with this organisation, sadly closed down, another victim of austerity, did a brilliant project called the Childfare State, where they asked young people to imagine the welfare state they wanted. I think it was just, I was really struck by this. I had nothing to do with it, I was just an advisor. There's no social care on that, is there? There's just neighbourhoods right down the middle of it. I think there's a reason for that. I think one of the things we need to do increasingly, and we've been doing webinars recently around regenerative farming, and I've been trying to understand better some of the kind of ecological questions around the planet. But I think thinking about regenerative practices in social policy is well worth doing. Letting the soil do its work, trying to really understand where, in a sense, the goodness of things comes from is, I think, part of our approach. And I've been playing around with this, and Ruth and I actually, in this building about a month ago, were with hundreds of people talking about neighbourhoods of care. What are the conditions that create neighbourhoods of care at the Fearless Cities Summit? So I've been thinking about these kind of conditions that you need to create to see the goodness emerge. We need to create actual ways of welcoming. You know, how do we actually welcome people into our community? It seems a really basic thing, doesn't it? But actually we haven't created any real kind of structures or disciplines in our communities to acknowledge that people need to be seen, met, found, talked to. We need to create spaces where people can meet with freedom. And one of the great things we heard at Fearless Cities was there are some amazing projects going on about people creating kind of community eating places, community pubs, community buildings, but actually properly kind of community-based things like Dharma Wellbeing that actually belong to the community, that people can actually use to create value. We really need to think about how we nurture people's capacities. How have we allowed the process of education to become so overly professionalised? What are we doing to welcome people's talents and make the best of them and support people to grow in our communities? How do we create roles and groups for action? In a way, civil society is this in that kind of top pink. We're kind of used to now as service providers, but some of the most amazing things are going on in southern India, where communities are coming together and basically creating roles for everybody. They invent roles, like they'll have a street where one of the kids is Minister for Fun. Right? We can create like the roles we need to do the work we need to do in the community. We've forgotten that that's within our capacity. And we need to share things. So certainly things like personal budgets could be seen as an asset to the community. But so's time banking, so's peer support, so's all the ways in which we can actually share stuff to get stuff happening. And we'll need to find ways of taking care of these spaces together. We'll need to develop some form of kind of neighbourhood governance. So again, this is like, again, there are debates about this, but it's quite a common norm is to suggest that there might be like 5,000 people for a neighbourhood. So just think about that. Actually, again, these are all averages. Well, that's 1,000 children, 3,000 working age adults, 1,000 elders. If you take 3%, which is on the high side of those who are eligible for social care, that's 150 people, including 8 looked after children. Think about that 150 people in the context of a neighbourhood. Do the silos we use to separate people into different groups and different labels make sense then? Do you want a learning disability department for Nether Edge? I don't think so. Actually, we would start thinking very differently about people's needs and people's gifts if we change the scale of things. That includes, again, Ruth, sorry if this data's way wrong, I just looked it up really quickly, but 450 people who are unpaid carers in that neighbourhood. That's a big chunk of the neighbourhood, isn't it? And 225 are being paid to be carers. And then you can extend these. Think about the 110 people who are wheelchair users in Nether Edge. I don't know, like I live in Nether Edge. It's bloody difficult to get a wheelchair around Nether Edge, I think. Like we've got hills, but there's very few cuts. There's very few buildings are accessible. Are neighbourhoods really aware that they've got so many people who are using wheelchairs, and that affects people? Like, do the shopkeepers really know how many people there are? You know what I mean? It changes the way we think about these things. They don't become horrendous problems, they become enormous opportunities. Extraordinarily, there are 3 children's social workers and 7 adult social workers per neighbourhood. Now, not all of those people are currently doing care management / social work. But that's actually the numbers, that's based on the real numbers of registered working social workers now. 10 social workers per neighbourhood seems more than enough for 150 people, doesn't it? 2 GPs, 8 community nurses, 1 primary school, 3.6 million on social care, 10.5 on education, 14 on the NHS, 0.2 on the work programme, and you could go on. How much of that money actually lands in neighbourhoods? Very, very little. Very, very little. Most of it's going into bigger institutional services that might be in one place and into salaries that are distributed very unequally. So like if you go to the wealthy parts of Sheffield, you'll find where the doctors and the senior nurses and the administrators live, you know, so that the money isn't getting into all those neighbourhoods. And I say, the social care model at the moment means that 50% of that social care budget is being spent somewhere else. So just think about this in terms of basic economic development and the problems of poverty and economic deprivation so many cities face. And flip this round to imagine a world where actually peer support was the heart of every neighbourhood. The kind of things we see in Doncaster are normal. People helping each other. And I've come across loads of brilliant examples of this in the country already. Community-owned spaces in every neighbourhood. Support organised on a neighbourhood basis. So you basically, your support comes from people who live locally. Spain's just done this in Barcelona. They organise super blocks, which are just like neighbourhood space things, and they organise care on that basis. I think it was Walsall, or it was a bit Dudley, maybe. I'm a bit vague on the West Midlands, but I was on a webinar where one said they're commissioning domiciliary care on a neighbourhood basis. Yeah, that makes sense because people are living locally, working locally, they're travelling less, their lives are not being made chaotic by the system, and it's better for people's knowledge of the community that they live in. What if we focused on making the whole neighbourhood actually genuinely accessible? To it, not just in terms of wheelchairs, which are bloody important, but in terms of words and ideas, so that people with learning disabilities, people with dementia feel safe, feel secure, are able to get around, know what's going on. Imagine the benefits not just for them, for the whole community, of making the community almost kind of accessible and easy read. Most people can't make sense of what's going on in our communities. Imagine if professionals used the Buurtzorg model and we had all of those key professionals in the neighbourhood, self-organised, less hierarchy, making decisions together. Imagine if the budget for those neighbourhoods was in the neighbourhood. Imagine if neighbourhoods started to become hubs for genuine democratic, possibly participative governance. Will we get this kind of solution from Wes Streeting's latest commission or whatever else is going to come out of central government? Will we get an expectation that every one of us has to do work to take care of each other? It's a shared collective responsibility. Will we end poverty and means testing for social care? Will we get meaningful portable entitlements that allow people to make sensible decisions about their lives? Will every family get the support they need? Will innovation and creativity flourish? Will institutional provision disappear? Will every neighbourhood become inclusive and welcoming? Is that something central government's likely to deliver in the next 5 years? I don't think so. But I might be wrong. But I can't see that in the kind of things I'm hearing. So this is my little, I've got 5 minutes, which is just about enough time, so that's good. This year we published this map of the neighbourhoods of Sheffield. Sheffield are making great progress as a city in lots of areas, and as citizens, and me and Tom French, with support from NHS Sheffield, did this initiative to get citizens to define what the neighbourhoods are. Sheffield's lacking a good neighbourhood map, so this is the best one we've got so far. And it turned out that there are 147 neighbourhoods in Sheffield, and which, anybody know snooker? No, we shouldn't we, really? But I didn't recognise. That's a maximum break. So that is a very good number for Sheffield. And we're going to be working more on this to start populating the data around these neighbourhoods. And we had 500 people offer to be citizen mappers to keep this work going. Over the last over this year, I've been working with kind of statutory leaders in South Yorkshire to see if we could get a commitment to a neighbourhood care strategy for South Yorkshire. And we now have all 6 statutory bodies, so that's the NHS, the 4 cities, and people say Rotherham isn't a city, but it bloody is by any normal human standard. It's only our weird definition of cities that isn't. So all 4 cities and the NHS and the mayoralty have all agreed that neighbourhood care should be a strategic priority. So we've now got to try and work on turning this into both a research and learning strategy. My understanding of this, in a way, is trying to be more ecological, and a lot of these things are just like working models as much as anything else. But I think if we think about the community and the slide I showed earlier as kind of like the topsoil, then we think about what sits underneath that and what can we do to nurture the topsoil that creates a kind of flourishing communities. That's the way I'd like us to think about these things. We need all these things, so it's not about what this isn't is a kind of David Cameron big society bullshit, okay? So we need public services, we need human rights, we need constitutional protections. Yes, we need community services. We need all of the things on here. We don't have to trade off between them. But we have to really pay attention to how are we creating that kind of fertile ground, the neighbourhoods we walk into in the morning, the relationships we're part of, the creativity that either does or does not exist on our street, in our neighbourhood, round the corner, at the pub, in the cafe, at the church. Yes? That's the fundamental test of whether we can make this work, and that's what unlocks capacity for positive lives for people. And, I mean, again, I'm not going to dwell on this too much, but we've tried to identify some of the strategies, and this is perhaps more complex. There are 3 basic strategies, I think, that stand out for me. When it comes to the kind of creating capacity at a citizen level, I think we know how to do that. It does require some leadership, some courage. There are things that help it, but you know, the kind of work that we've seen at PFG, Women's Centres, so many places, we know how to do it. How to encourage more of it is a challenge, but it's a realistic challenge. I think that, although it's not been something that local authorities in the NHS have been very, very confident to do, but there are interesting signs, aren't there? Even the central government had this neighbourhood NHS recently, and certainly the statutory leaders I'm talking to in South Yorkshire, I think are ready to start really rethinking the way public services turn up in their neighbourhoods. I'm not suggesting that's easy. Like all organisational change, it's full of challenges. But I think people are ready for that. I think maybe the third strategy is even the hardest, though. It's for organisations like Choice Support, the organisations that I've spent part of my life in, to reimagine what their role is if they want to put their roots back down into community. We still need those kind of skills, but we don't need all the boxes in all the places that they currently are, and that's quite challenging. So, but I think we kind of know what the process looks like. So this is my final point, really. So, again, it may be up for debate, but is centrally led reform going to save the day? I don't think so. But I think positive change is out there, and we saw loads of examples of this when we were together here a few weeks ago. I'm seeing loads of examples in our work, not just nationally but globally. I think that the things that people with disabilities are fighting rightfully for, things that families are fighting for, the things that communities want, can be co-created together. There will have to be a lot of listening to each other and understanding different perspectives to make this work. But I think those things can be created. I think there is leadership in our statutory services who could get behind that. So my last line was learning together how to achieve these changes will make them real. So in other words, we might not know how to do it, but if we start trying to do it and trying to figure out what the right questions are, we'll make it real. Like we'll change our purpose through the process of just trying to do it. And perhaps an organisation like Circle could play a really useful part in that. Maybe that's a theme you could add to your list. Okay, I think that's Thank you.
Much appreciated. We've now got some reflections and thoughts from Ruth Hannon, who's going to be coming up in a minute. Ruth is a co-founder of Careful, which she founded with Hannah Webster in 2023, and it brings together research, advocacy and participation to conceptualise and demonstrate what a new care-centred future might look like. And Ruth brings experience of caring and the care system, with 15 years experience working in the third sector, where she's worked at the local and national level with charities such as Carers Trust and also with think tanks such as the RSA. So I'd like to invite Ruth to come up and make some reflections, please. Thank you.
Hi everybody. When I used to be at Carers Trust, I used to work on this project called the Triangle of Care, and I used to often do talks with the creator of the Triangle of Care, called Alan Worthington. Marvellous man, do look it up, it's exceptional. And often he'd speak before me, and I'd say, it's a bit like the Wurzels coming on, having had Led Zeppelin in support, and I feel like I'm just replicating that experience again. Right. I'm hoping my slides are just going to whiz past behind me. So if they don't change in about 30 seconds, somebody give me a shout. So, hiya. Yes, I'm Ruth Hannon. I am one half of Careful. We are very new. We're nearly coming up to our first birthday. The better half of Careful, Hannah Webster, can't hear today because she is much further south and I'm the northern half of Careful. And what we believe is that there's an opportunity to reshape our world and, more crucially, our economy that enables us to care for ourselves, one another and the planet. And we think neighbourhoods of care are part of that exploration, but our work is also focused beyond our local communities. So we're both carers and we've had very, very different experiences of care and we've had different challenges. And something we recognised was that the current solutions for unpaid care would have no impact on our circumstances, on our lives. So we started to look at what would. And in the 21st century, we accept now that health of citizens is foundational to society. Not just the individual, we even refer to it collectively as the health of the nation. And care for the health of the nation is relatively new. If you think about it, despite challenges of recent years, we still see that people living longer and in better health. But if we'd said to people in 1900, you'll have universal health care for your children and grandchildren, I wonder what they would have thought about that. So, neighbourhoods of care, we think, are a potential to create a model of care that supports and meets our 21st century society's needs. But neighbourhoods exist within wider complex systems that at present ignore the need and even the concept of care. So as the conversation rumbles on about how to fund and fix social care, we believe there is a flaw in this approach. Just like our social security system, our social care model is based on a society that no longer exists. As such, it's as little like trying to fix a dripping tap as the house falls down around your ears. So we believe we need to take a radical approach to care. Just as health is now seen as foundational to society, we believe that care should be too. At any point in our lives, we'll have a relationship to care. For some, that might be brief due to severe or short-term illness, and for others it might be lifelong. But as our society shifts and changes, the likelihood that you will have a relationship to care becomes more likely. At present, that means that more people experience poverty, economic insecurity, drop out of paid work, and experience health inequalities because they have that relationship to care. So we think we need to think about care no longer as the responsibility of health and social care, because as our experiences have shown, those solutions don't don't solve the greater systemic problems. We believe that the challenges we will all experience won't be addressed by them. And for many, the new approach to care has to thrive within a new economic model. So in our existing GDP economic model, which is, have to be clear, it's only 100 years old. We chose this, we can choose something else. Unpaid care, unpaid labour has no economic value. To give you some context, an oil spill has more economic value than unpaid care. The person who invented the fidget spinner has more economic value than I do. And I think this plays out now with the shift in narrative that we've had, and we saw writ large last week when we talk about people not being in paid work as being economically inactive. So we are very much rooting our economy within this GDP model, and it's placing unpaid labour far, far away from any economic value at all. So we believe we need to centre care in a new economic system that works around and within it. And paid work and social security must be redesigned to enable that to happen. So we have examples of seeing some of those shifts already. Things like the 4-day week, like universal basic income, like universal basic services. These things are starting to move. If you think weekends were not something we had off, and I used to work in a shop, so it still sticks in my throat a little bit that it doesn't quite apply to everybody. But paid work was one way, it can be another way. And unless we start to make those changes, it's not going to work for a lot of us in the future. So we believe that it's time that our economy cared so that we can be as revolutionary as our forebears, making caring for ourselves, one another and the planet a revolutionary act.